Hello friends, welcome back to the next session on operations planning, scheduling and control. Now let's begin with our learning. In this particular session, we'll be understanding and dealing with the case study of installation of elevators from aggregate production planning, a case study that will be undertaken. The learning objectives. In this particular case study, the learners will be able to understand what do we mean by forecasting and aggregate planning and a case study related to the forecasting and aggregate planning. Now let's understand what is the case all about. In this particular session, we'll be first dealing with the overview or introduction of the case study, then a case study on installation of an elevator company's aggregate production planning, and how does this particular case study deal with the concept of forecasting and aggregate planning. To brief you or summarize the overview of introduction, in this particular case, an example of an elevator company, that is, an elevator which has been installed and how the activities are being conducted in an organization is being undertaken. So, aggregate production planning that has been required at a certain stage is being provided in this particular case. Now, further, how this particular elevator company takes into forward or the consideration the various forecasting and planning activities will be identified and will be discussed. The background of the case study. The particular elevator company was trying to or aiming to increase the output and economic growth, and they have been influencing in the competition. The various modifications in the organization with respect to the production was already being implemented, and accordingly the production planning and control, the material requirement planning, material resource planning, manufacturing resource planning was everything done in an effective way. So when all those activities are being conducted in an effective way, the product that is been there as an out product was of a very quantitative and qualitative nature, and hence the economic growth of the company was also increasing. This particular case study was an installation of an elevator company was having its issues with respect to the aggregate production planning. The aggregate production planning was always aiming at focusing to find out how the production planning can be undertaken in a better, effective way, and the sales production projections can be matched with the demand. There was always a flexibility in the demand and supply for a certain product, and the company was not able to forecast and analyze how to match the demand and supply. So for this particular concern, the research was being undertaken by the organization. The goal of this particular research, it was to examine and compare the predictions that have been made by the companies, that is an installation of an elevator industry, as well as the findings that have been undertaken by the aggregate planning module. The planning module was always having a certain difference in price level with respect to the availability of products and goods and services in the organization and how those particular goods and services can be matched with the demand level. The demand level was being observed for a period of 12 months, and accordingly determining the best prediction method was needed to be accepted. So, with respect to the comparison of the prediction method, the installation elevator industry was not able to identify the aggregate production planning and aggregate production cost which needs to be associated. And hence, for this particular concern, the various approaches was being applied. These particular approaches that were being used are the moving average approach, the single exponential smoothing, the double exponential smoothing, and the Winters method or the linear trend method. The last option that was being accepted was the quadratic trend model in this particular case study. So whichever option or the trend was being feasible, of optimum and profitable to the organization, such trial and error techniques was being undertaken, and accordingly the company has come to a decision to which implementation of technique needs to be undertaken. The MAPE, that is mean absolute percentage error, that particular error was not being identified, and accordingly the lowest mean, that is mean absolute percentage error, was used to assess the forecast accuracy. So based on the various several components of the moving average, single exponential, double exponential smoothing, Winter method, linear trend model and quadratic model, one model has to be selected, and the model which gives a resultant output of the minimum MAPE. What is a MAPE? A MAPE is a mean absolute percent error. That particular model needs to be selected. The error of reduction is always essentially required, and accordingly one has to see that whatever product that have been manufactured are of a qualitative nature and there are no major errors that have been created into that particular product, and hence for those particular concern reduction of error is essentially important or essentially required. and hence the MAPE was calculated for different periods or different levels of introduction. Now let's understand the scenario or background of the case. Due to the economic development, the manufacturing services industries are experiencing difficulties, and hence there are several issues with respect to the manufacturing, production, operational activities, series of activities, and what amount of investment needs to be employed. The investment that needs to be employed, it completely differs about the supply of the product into the market, and it does not be able to identify what will be the demand forecast. The demand forecasting has been at a certain level, which predicted that the quantity demanded will be always in an increasing stage. But at a certain stages, when the demand forecasting goes down, then accordingly the production also needs to go down. And accordingly, there was no matching between the demand and supply as a major component. So, ranging from various activities, the investment, the cost, the component, the production, the raw material, everything got hampered. And as a result of this particular concern, the business or the organization needs to improve their capacity. With the implement or usage of new technology, the production activity was being done very effectively, but the ultimate customer satisfaction and needs was not at the optimum level. And hence, at certain stages, the production or the sales goes down, and accordingly, the demand for a certain product also goes down simultaneously. And hence, providing qualitative goods and services to the consumers in competition with the competitors is a challenging task to the organization. This particular case study with respect to the elevator company takes into account or takes into consideration the contracts to manufacture and install elevators. So the company was taking the various contracts from the various customers, and accordingly the manufacturing and installation of elevators was being undertaken at several sites or projects or plants and locations. The company is an industrial firm which is engaged in highly competitive construction work with current operational issues. The various issues that have been associated with the organization are with respect to the material, the equipment, the inventory control management, the forecasting of client demand, building and structural preparedness, electrical issues, and so on. So these are the various few of the issues which the company was been focusing on. So with this particular concern, the company's case study go ahead with respect to how do we solve these particular issues. The company is aiming to provide the qualitative and quantitative product in both the terms. But with respect to the several issues with respect to the forecasting, changes in the demand fashions or patterns, the company is not able to forecast and plan about what activities of productions are needed to be undertaken. Now let's understand the various problems that have been associated with this particular case. Due to the issues with respect to the product and the competition and quality and the demand factors, the firm was unable to produce the item while incurring a high production expenses. The expenses of the company was at a rapid increasing stage, but there was no consumer demand for a certain product. The consumer was losing the confidence into the product and into the market, and accordingly, the competitors was getting benefited out of those particular concerns. The major source of this particular issue was inadequate production planning in the face of fluctuating the client demand. So it was been observed in terms of the case study that there was no aggregate production planning that was being implemented or that was being incorporated. So for this particular concern, when we say that forecasting of planning on goods and services is essentially required, so here in this case, the company was failing to implement a forecasting plan. As a result of this, the improvements in the work capacity was required to be improvised, and accordingly, the utilization of limited resources was of a challenging nature. The resources with respect to the personnel, machinery, materials, equipment, procedures of capital was also limited, and accordingly, they were not optimally utilized and they were not being used. So with those particular concerns, there was a wastage of resources in the organization, and hence overall there was problem with respect to the production expenses, inadequate production capacity, and the limited or unlimited amount of resources which was being utilized. Now, what are the various possibilities of the harm or the hampering of the impact on the company? As a result of this, in order to meet the goals of adequate nature, the company was planning to prepare a critical master plan schedule. This particular schedule was focusing on how the production activities will be undertaken and what are the various choices that are available with the organization to change the various operational and production strategy. The primary goal of the company was to increase the production, and accordingly, when the quantity increases, the company will be able to earn a certain amount of revenue and certain amount of profit or income will be generated in order to minimize the production expenses. In this case, the demand for a product at a given point of time needs to be estimated, and based on the demand that has been estimated, the production needs to be undertaken. When production needs to be undertaken, so accordingly, the inventory needs to be made available and it needs to be procured to the manufacturing, sourcing, processing, and the supplies or the stores department. And hence, this was a challenging task with all the departments to have a well coordinated series of activities. And accordingly, when the production needs to be increased, the working hours or the conditions of all the department also needs to be increased simultaneously. And hence, this could be only done when there is a proper communication between all the departments, proper forecasting or planning is into existence, and the implementation of strategic goals are into existence. Furthermore, the aggregate production planning allows for the more efficient utilization of resources which are of a limited nature. And hence, aggregate planning was essentially important, or it was essentially required in order to see that how those activities can be conducted in a very better and efficient way. So for those particular concern, the aggregate planning of production of goods and services was essentially required. Now let's look at the various decision variables that are there in this particular case study. In this particular case study, the various decision variables was with respect to the T, that is the forecasting time. So the number one or the first perspective that plays an important role is the time perspective. So forecasting of time, that is when the product will be demanded and when the product needs to be delivered. Both this particular time needs to be assessed or identified at an early stage, at a preliminary stage, and hence the T is the first factor, that is the forecasting of time. N is the number of product, that is how many number of product needs to be quantified, that is the quantity that needs to be produced. So N is a number of product, that is how much production activity needs to be undertaken. The WT focuses on the concept of workforce size, that is how many number of people, that is the number of laborers that needs to be employed. These particular laborers may be either a skilled workforce or the unskilled workforce. So what size of workforce will be required needs to be forecasted, and accordingly the decision needs to be undertaken. OT. Now when we say that we need to increase the production time or the working time, then accordingly the OT, that is overtime hours, also needs to be increased. And hence the assessment or identification of the number of overtime hours needs to be assessed and identified, and accordingly the production activity needs to be improvised. HT. The next component of HT focuses on number of employees to be hired. Now, if in case the production capacity or the activity needs to be increased, then so accordingly we need to increase the number of people or the employees that are being required. So additional hiring of employees with respect to the requirement of labor workforce needs to be assessed, and accordingly we need to identify about what number of laborers will be required. LT, the number of laborers employees laid off. So in this case, certain types of laborers or the employees or the workforce which are not required into the organization needs to be laid off or needs to be relieved from the organization, and hence the consideration as a factor or the variable of LT, that is the laborers or the employees which will be laid off from the organization or from this particular activity, needs to be assessed. The another variable is the ST, wherein ST stands for number of units stocked out or backlogged. So the stocking time or the availability of raw material with the stores department, manufacturing department, production department needs to be assessed and identified, and based on those particular concern, certain decisions as to availability of product into the market needs to be undertaken. The PT. The PT stands for variable composition, comprises of number of units that have been produced. So how many number of units have been produced into the market consideration as per the demand and supply factors, and what is the plant capacity for production. So for those particular concern, the factor of PT needs to be assessed and calculated. The next variable is CT, that is number of units that are subcontracted. So a certain activity may be conducted within the organization or a certain activity may be conducted outside the organization. And for those particular concern, the subcontracting also needs to be assessed. And lastly, the IT, which focuses on the concept of inventory at the end of the certain period. So when the production activity needs to be started, at that particular place, the inventory needs to be assessed, and when the production activity is been completed after the increase in number of size, the inventory at the end of this particular period also needs to be assessed. So the inventory at two levels, that is at the beginning as well as at the evening, needs to be monitored or needs to be calculated. Now let's take the case example that has been provided in the case study. So this particular case study focuses on 5 different cases, that is 5 different situations. So these particular different type of situations may be either case 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5. So there may be 5 types of cases or 5 simulations in which this particular case study can be solved or the problems can be eliminated. Number 1, the demand from prediction by the quadratic trend model. So a quadratic trend model can be implemented, and accordingly, based on the predictions of the demand, the production capacity may be either increased or decreased. So first basic essential requirement is prediction of demand by the quadratic trend model. This was the first case. In the second case, or the simulation or the type of solution that can be implemented is demand from the predictions at 10% lower rate. So the company needs to predict a certain amount of demand, and the production capacity or the prediction capacity can be below the 10% level. The third case study focuses, or the case example focuses on the demand from predictions at 10% higher. That is, if the demand for a certain product and as well as the predictions of the supply level increases at the 10% level. So what will be the changes or in a implementation that needs to be incorporated? The case number 4 focuses on demand from the predictions at the 20% lower. So earlier case number 2 was focusing on the 10% lower. Now case number 4 focuses on the predictions at 20% lower. The case number 5, it focuses on the concept of demand from the predictions at 20% higher level. So in this case, if the demand is been predicted to increase at the 20% higher level, then what will be the impact on the production and operations capacity? Now let's understand the aggregate production planning of elevator installation company. So in this particular diagram or the particular chart, this particular table shows you the information with respect to the data that is available with the company and the quantity that is available for the production processes. The various values with respect to the material cost, production volume, the amount of production, large number of combined overtime hours, inventory cost, stock out cost, the hired cost, the laid off cost, the recruitment cost, the overtime cost, and the subcontractor cost is being shown. Now let's look at each and every one individual cost component in detail. With respect to the material cost, the valuation of the quantity that is being provided is 50,000 baht per work. In terms of production volume in normal time, it is 5% of all work day per person. The amount of production during overtime is 3% of all the worker that has been undertaken per day per person. The largest number of combined overtime that has been undertaken is less than or equal to 30 hours per month. The inventory cost that has been associated is 1000 baht per unit. The stockout cost is 500 baht per unit. The hired cost is 500 baht per person. The laid off cost is 1500 baht per person, and the recruitment cost here, that is RC, is 12,000 baht per person. The overtime cost that has been associated, that is OC, is 100 baht per hour, and the subcontracted cost, that is CT, is 50,000 baht per unit. Now, based on the forecasting model that has been implemented, so either case number 1, that is the implementation of the trend approach model, or case number 2, 3, 4, or 5. Any one method can be implemented, and one of the method can be beneficial to the organization. So after the trial and error basis or the simulation that was being undertaken, the results and discussions of the case study was being observed. So the MAP value that was being seen with respect to the moving average, that is N3, is 20.49. The moving average, that is N5, is 20.06. The single exponential smoothing, that is alpha, is 0.37. The value of MAP is 22.13. The double exponential smoothing with respect to the alpha and beta, that is gamma, is 18.85. The Winters method, that is alpha being 0.2, beta being 0.2, and gamma being 0.2, is 22.41. The linear trend model, the value of MAP is 18.62, and quadratic trend model, the valuation of MAP is 17.85. So these were the results and discussion that was being undertaken after implementation of all the 5 cases, that is case number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So now let's see what was the conclusion or the output that was being generated. So based on the predictions and aggregate production planning that was being undertaken, various mathematical equations was being undertaken, and accordingly the company has come to a certain conclusion about what scenario can be implemented. The various scenario or calculations at this particular stage shows a certain increase or decrease in the value of a certain product. With respect to the cases that was being observed, the lowest possible production cost in the variety of scenario is needed to be calculated, and accordingly, the changes in the production or the general price level has to be observed. The problem associated with the elevator manufacturing company was the demand perspectives. The company was not able to forecast what will be the demand for a certain product and how aggregate production planning needs to be undertaken. So, evaluating of those particular difficulties was essentially important, and controlling on the cost of production with respect to the manufacturing cost, operation cost, marketing cost, financial cost, production cost was essentially required. In case number 1, which had the lowest production cost, the demand figures based on the estimated production cost was 3 lakh 32 lakh 33,000 baht. In case number 2, when demand fell by 10%, the cost of manufacturing of the certain product was 29 lakh and 7,000 baht. Whereas in case number 3, when the manufacturing cost was 35 lakh 68,000 baht, when the demand grew by 10%. And when the demand dropped by 10%, that is case number 4, the production cost was 26 lakh and 7,000 baht. So in this way, at several stages or in different levels, that is case number 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, we can see that the baht value is also increasing or decreasing. In case number 1, it is 33 lakhs. In case number 2 is 29.07. In case number 3, it is 35.68. And case number 4, it is 26.07. So there is no stability with respect to increase or decrease in the baht value. So as and when the demand or the production value increases by 20% or decreases by 20% or 10%, so accordingly the value of the manufacturing cost either increases or decreases. In the last concern, that is in the case number 5 of baht, the valuation of the production or the manufacturing cost was 38 lakh 75,000, and when the demand that was growing or increased by 20%. And hence, with this particular concern, we can identify and come to a conclusion that the organization was able to boost productivity only by improving its client satisfaction. So when the client satisfaction ultimately increases, the quantity demanded for a certain product increases, and simultaneously the production activity that is being undertaken also increases. And hence there is a minor difference between the change in the production level or activity, that is the 10% increase or 10% decrease, 20% increase or 20% decrease. And hence from the data collected of the simulation method with respect to case number 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, we can see that the organization is able to boost the productivity, and hence the productivity can be increased or it can be developed only when there is a client satisfaction or customer satisfaction, and hence better forecasting of all those activities is essentially required. And hence this particular case study gives you a certain consideration or understanding about the production variables that can be implemented in the organization, that is whether a production capacity may be acceptable or may not be acceptable, and how a meta-heuristic approach can be applied. The meta-heuristic approach or the method focuses on combination of all the factors and considering the situation or a scenario with respect to changes in the general price level, changes in the cost of production, changes in the manufacturing cost, and so on. And hence it answers to all the difficulties that have been undertaken. The outcomes of this particular research focuses on, or it has been considered by various aggregate production planning activities that have been undertaken in the scenario of 2016 and 2017. All of these particular concern focuses on the lowering of the production cost and how improving the efficiency can be undertaken. So quality of the product can be increased by controlling the cost of production or manufacturing cost in the organization, and hence ultimately it can be resultant to the increase in the customer satisfaction. So in this particular case study, the computations of the value revealed that the inadequate, that is the number of labor workforce, availability of finances, and so on, does not impact the factors of production, and hence the cost that has been associated with each and every individual component whether at a 10% increase or a decrease or a 20% increase or 20% decrease is having a direct resultant impact on the bath value, and hence the manufacturing line needs to be in a stable way. And hence, as a resultant, labor allocation was considered as the another aspect in which lowering the production cost was essentially important or it was being required. So certain component or the factor of labor cost was also being associated at this particular size. Now let's summarize what we have learned in this particular session. In this particular session, we have understood or taken a case study that has been associated with the forecasting and aggregate planning. The case study focuses on the concept of forecasting and aggregate planning with respect to an elevator manufacturing industry, wherein how all the activities are being needed to be conducted in a very effective way, and how the cases with respect to case number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 with respect to the increase in the production capacity or decrease in the production capacity can be undertaken, and a better forecasting techniques can be applied, and the overall aggregate planning can be done in a very effective way. I hope you must have enjoyed the learning and there are better takeaways from this particular session and the module. Thank you for your patience listening. We'll stay connected and we'll be staying learning. Thank you.